Good morning. Today is Monday. We're in Tess of the D'Urbervilles, chapters 33 to 36. Now Tess has consented to marry Angel, and he wants to spend the day before the wedding together. It's a romantic situation, and says that these are circumstances that would never be repeated. It's a foreshadowing statement. Hardy early in the chapter says that Angel's been kind of a recluse. And he has. He has separated and isolated himself from the rest of the people at the dairy. He sleeps in a loft above everybody else. He eats at a separate table. And that's over. He can't be a recluse anymore. They're going to spend a night in an inn. They're walking into the inn. On the way out of the inn come two men. One of the men recognizes Tess from Trantridge, where Alec raped her, and says, "True, comely or pretty enough, but unless I make a great mistake, he definitely recognizes her," and he makes a nasty remark. Angel hears this, hits him, then the man apologizes. "I beg pardon, it was a complete mistake." But as he continues on with his friend says, "Was it a mistake?" And the man says, "No, I recognize her definitely." Tess cannot escape her past. Tess is a little balky about the wedding. "I only meant if it should have to be put off. Could we put it off a little later?" Procrastinating. They part tenderly. He falls asleep and she does. But when she wakes up, she decides it's time to confess everything, so she writes out her confession and then slips it under the door of his loft at Talbothays, figuring the next morning will tell everything. The next morning he gets up, comes downstairs, kisses her as warmly as ever, and she figures, he's read it, everything's okay. Okay. He's affectionate and kind. The wedding day arrives. She comes downstairs at breakfast time, and they're going to go to the wedding to the local church. Now, I assume most of us will get married someday. And there's some people who should be at your wedding, and you'll want them there. They're called your parents, at least. Well, something's very wrong here then, because number one, nobody is invited from Marlette. She does not invite her parents. But worse still, Angel does not invite his. And his father and mother may have written to him and they say, "It seems like you're rushing into this, but you're at the age where you are the best judge, so go ahead." But he does not invite his mother and father to the wedding. And I can't understand that, because they're very good people. They should be there. But he doesn't see it that way. And now we see something very wrong with him. It doesn't distress him that he didn't invite them. And his goal is to hold Tess in hiding almost until he can present her to them as a D'Urberville and a lady. So apparently he's ashamed of her. Remember, he just used her as the country milkmaid and nothing else. And he overlooks that she already is a lady because she has such good characteristics, which he's already spoken, but hasn't heard himself speaking. It's mouth talk. And so he wants to produce her when he's trained her to be something. They rise from breakfast. She has to go up to his loft room, and she climbs the ladder, and as she does so, she looks under the door and she sees the letter she wrote. She slipped it under the door, but she also slipped it under the rug just inside the door. And here Hardy is definitely showing he is the master of fate. She put it in the wrong place. He hasn't read the letter. And she's put in a terrible dilemma now. She has to take the letter, withdraws it, goes to her own room, and she destroys it. Do we falter for this? Should we falter for this? Well, we're in the gray area. On the one hand, she should tell him everything. On the other, why shouldn't she have a chance at loving happiness in her life? And why should it matter if she does confess to him? Why should it matter to him at all? Good question. On the way to the church, she sees him, he sees her. Superstition says groom should not see bride before a wedding ceremony. They've broken that rule. And she says, I have things to confess. And he says, I want to confess I have confession too. I want to confess some things too. Okay. We'll do it when we're at our lodging. Fine. They order a carriage. It's an old carriage. And Hardy digresses briefly to tell us there's a postilion on the carriage, a guy who used to ride on the back of carriages. There used to be 2 of them. It was an old custom. But this boy is 60 years old. He's alcoholic, and he hasn't done any postilion work forever. And Hardy is chronicling again the dying off of the old ways of doing things. So the postilion is hired. He's brought out of retirement. He's put on the carriage, and they ride from the church to their lodging. Angel would have liked at least one of his brothers there as a groomsman. So this wedding is all off. There's no best man. There's no maids of honor. There's no groomsmen. There's no parents. This just isn't right. He knows that his brothers probably disapprove of the marriage because he's been hanging around with dairy folk. So they're snobs too. But they're not there, so it doesn't matter. Tess doesn't know anything about this. There are almost no people in the church. But Claire knows that she loves him. But he did not know at the time the full depth of her devotion. What long-suffering it guaranteed, what honesty, what endurance, what good faith. These are all Tess's stellar qualities. But he's not aware of those. They leave the church. Bells are ringing, and they get into the carriage. And Tess trembles at the carriage because this is the old D'Urberville coach. According to tradition and legend, a horrible crime was committed in that coach, maybe a murder. They reach the home, and she is now Mrs. Angel Clare. That is her new identity. She kneels down to pray. And they're back at Marla at the dairy, they're back at the dairy at Talbothays. And there are her 3 competitors, still, and their hearts are breaking. But something happens. There's a rooster. Now, roosters are only supposed to crow at the beginning of the day. But there's a rooster, and he crows not once, not twice, but 3 times in the afternoon. And they think it's a bad omen. And here we got to go to the New Testament. Because Jesus tells one of his disciples the night before he's crucified, tomorrow, before the cock crows 3 times, you will deny me. This rooster crows 3 times. And so we've got an image of betrayal. And it's not a good image and a good omen at all. We're in chapter 34. They've engaged the house for their honeymoon, and it turns out it is the seat of a D'Urberville residence. Tess just cannot get away from her past. There's a serving woman. The house is a little old. And they walk in, and there are 2 portraits of D'Urberville women. The portraits are attached or built into the wall and cannot be removed. And Tess says that they're horrid looking. And they frighten her. But Tess resembles them. She's one of the D'Urberville women. Features were unquestionably traceable in these exaggerated forms. Tess's features are unquestionably traceable. They wash their hands in a basin. He says to her, which fingers are mine, which are yours? She says, they are all yours. She's devoted to him. The sun is setting, the dying part of the day, and they're waiting for their luggage. And they're still talking about that rooster, which Mrs. Crick said, oh, it just means the weather's going to change. Well, yeah, the weather in this relationship is about to change drastically. It's going to get really cold. There's a fire in the fireplace. But she doesn't seem very cheerful, and Angel notices this, and then a package arrives. What's in the package? Well, it's addressed to Tess Mrs. Angel Clare, but there's also a note in it, and what's in the package are the family jewels. And they are now Tess's. There's a beautiful diamond necklace and beautiful earrings. And Mr. Control, Angel says, put them on. Put them on now. He's ordering her what to do. And it's too bad we can't watch the film, because at this point, when she puts them on, he steps back and he looks at her and he goes, how beautiful you are. And she is. And I always say the only thing missing from her is a small tiara crown. She looks like a queen, and she's beautiful. This is the high point of Tess's life. It's all downhill from here. They begin supper. Then there's a second arrival. It's somebody from Talbothays Dairy. And he brings up, did you forget about the rooster that crowed? And there's bad news from Talbothays, real bad. Number one, Reddy Priddle has tried to drown herself. She's committed suicide. And two, Marion has turned to drink. She's an alcoholic. And three is Hewitt has simply packed up and left Talbothays. Why? They're all heartbroken because Angel Clare was their one chance at love, and he's turned to someone else. This is the devastation he's wreaked, and being totally unconscious about it. What could he have done? Could he have spoken a consolation word to them a bit? Could he have said he was sorry? Could he have apologized? He could have done something. But he's too unconscious about other people's feelings. Remember, he's self-centered. And so he doesn't say anything. And so we got two suicide, an alcoholic, and a person who just rips her life to pieces. Marion has been found dead drunk. Without the least cause, said Tess, while they who have cause to be hide it and pretend they are not. The incident turns the scale for her. And they had deserved better at the hands of fate. She has a lot of sympathy for her friends. And so it's after dinner, and we're sitting in the living room in front of the fire, and she says, or he says, I want to make a confession to you, love. And it's time for them both to confess. Okay, so he goes first. He tells her the story of his relationship with a woman in London, how it lasted a few months. It was a sad affair. It ended, and he never repeated this offense. He's been putting it off. Do you forgive me? Well, Tess's eyes open wide up, and she is elated because now he can forgive her. Is there really that much difference between what happened to her and what he did? But when she says she has something to confess, he kind of blows her off and says, oh, now then for a wicked little one. He doesn't think it's going to be any big deal. She's just a simple dairymaid, you know. But the ashes in the grate, the fire is dying down. The heat and the passion in the relationship is going to die down. And Phase the Fifth is ominously entitled, The Woman Pays. Chapter 35. And she lays it all out for him. How she went to Trantridge, how Alec assaulted her, how she bore a child, how the child died. Tells him the whole thing. And she waits. He does not immediately say he forgives her. He gets up, takes the poker, stirs the fire, and he's dead common in his voice. Why didn't you tell me before? Ah, yes, you would have told me in a way, but I hindered you, I remember. Now, if this is my girl, there are two things I'm going to say in this order. One, I am so very sorry that this happened to you and that you were hurt in this way. I hate to see you suffer. Two, I want you to tell me where I can find him. You can put together what I'm going to do when I do find him. But he is not, Angel is not a man. Remember the question, which creep do you prefer? This is the second one. He has led her down the garden path, manipulated her to marry him, and now when she tells him the truth, he is going to reject her. And he shouldn't. She asks, haven't you forgiven me? Forgive me? Well, he says, forgiveness does not apply to the case. You are one person, now you are another. Okay, what kind of nonsense is this? Tess is the same person he asked to marry him. And he breaks into this weird laughter and says, mercy, ha ha ha, mercy. What are we talking about mercy for? And she says, I've been hoping, longing, praying to make you happy. I thought you loved me, my very self. He doesn't know herself at all. He's got this picture of her, and she just broke the picture. And he says, the woman I have been loving is not you. You are another woman in her shape. More nonsense. Then I don't belong to you anymore. Well, yeah, he does. She does. I'm too wicked for you. And again, Tessa's hyperconscience kicks into gear. She's starting to blame herself for this, and she shouldn't. He's to blame. He is not worthy of her at all. I shan't ask you to let me live with you. I shall not write to mother and sisters. And so this whole thing is shattered. She remains mute. She doesn't know what to do. The marriage ceremony happened. They're man and wife. But they got to do something. And Claire walks slowly down the road, and he's walking aimlessly. Doesn't even know where he's going. And she is totally shocked. She doesn't even know that the stars are overhead. And she's hearing a poem in her head. Behold, when thy face is made bare, he that loved thee shall hate. Thy face shall be no more fair at the fall of thy fate. For thy life shall fall as a leaf and be shed as the rain, and the veil of thine head shall be grief, and the crown shall be pain. Blaming herself for the situation. Again, it's not her fault at all. Was what he did with that woman in London so much different from what Alec did to her? No. But there's the double standard. It's one way for the woman. We judge her one way. We judge the man another. The double standard. And it's not fair. He talks about deceit. But then he says, do you forgive me? Well, he says, forgiveness is not all. I do forgive you, but forgiveness is not all. And then he gives his speech. I cannot help associating your decline as a family with this other fact of your want of firmness. Decrepit families postulate decrepit wills, decrepit conduct. Heaven, why did you give me a handle for despising you more by informing me of your descent? Here I was thinking you a new-sprung child of nature. There were you, the exhausted seedling of an effete aristocracy. So he does hate old, noble, aristocratic families, just like they rumored about him. And he thinks she's part of that, and she's not. She offers to kill herself. The river's down there. I can put an end to myself in it. He doesn't want that. There's the ruins of an old abbey there and a mill. Again, we got old buildings, the passing of the old ways. They proceed back into the house. The fire is dying, and there's mistletoe hanging. Now, what do you do under mistletoe? You kiss. They don't kiss. The mistletoe is worthless. The fire is dying. So she lays down in her bed, and existence doesn't seem to matter to her. He creeps upstairs, and she's asleep, and he thinks, well, she's asleep soundly, and I'm suffering terribly. And I always say here, he's not a man, he's a little boy, a self-centered, spoiled little boy. Or in Spanish, no es un hombre, es un cabrón. He's calm, he's trying to be calm, he's trying to be controlled, he's trying to show self-control, but he is not passion slave anymore. We're in chapter 36. So of course the sun comes up and dawn is there and the fire is out. And we got to figure out now, because he's made this mess of things, what are we going to do? Doesn't like it when the serving woman comes by. Third person's very uncomfortable. Has to talk his way out of that. And so they got to talk about this. And the first thing he wants her to do is, say it is not true, Tess. Say it's not true. Well, she can't. It is true. And he would have taken the lie. She explains that the baby died and the man is still alive. Okay. Then she offers for him to get rid of her. I think she should get rid of him right now by divorcing me. He calls her simple, childish, unformed. You don't understand the law. There's his view of her. You're dumb. You don't know much. You could cast me off if you were determined, or I could put an end to myself. Second time, she has a death wish. And it's bad. But Angel, it was thought of entirely on your account to set you free without the scandal of the divorce. She's willing to sacrifice herself so that he doesn't have to suffer. I think he should suffer a lot. They sit down at the breakfast table. The servant woman comes. He leaves to see a mill. And he comes back, and she serves him dinner. And the meal was passed in commonplace talk. Isn't this weird? A couple is deciding to break up, and they're acting just like an old married couple, talking to each other over dinner, and then he leaves again. But when he comes back, he gets upset because she clears the table and says, "You are not my servant, you are my wife." And again, we have to tap him on the shoulder and say, "Yeah, she is your wife, so why don't you treat her that way?" And she brightens when she hears this. "I may think of myself like that. Indeed, I am your wife?" "You may think so, Tess. You are. What do you mean?" Look at this conversation. He's saying she's his wife, but he's about to reject her. "I told you I thought I was not respectable enough. I didn't want to marry you, only you urged me." And she's right. He kept pushing and pushing and pushing and persisting. In a way, he is like Alec. He doesn't take no for an answer in a different way, but he's the one who urged her to do this. She didn't want to do it. So he's to blame. He's really to blame. She cries. But he's feeling a lot of antipathy here and sympathy through which a woman of the world might have conquered him. But Tess didn't think of this. She took everything as her deserts. Tess, with her hyperconscience, believes, "I deserve to be punished like this." No, you don't. He's the one who should be punished. And she shrinks into herself as if she's been struck. So they live in the same house, but they're more widely apart than they have ever been. And he's trying to think of a plan of procedure. She's awe-stricken to discover such determination. He will not change his mind. He is not flexible at all. And he's getting sick with thinking, well, too darn bad, cry me a Nile River. But she knows he is not going to live with her. And he can't live with her without despising myself. Self-centered again, Angel. How can we live together while that man lives? Well, there's a simple solution for that. I cannot say remain. I had not thought so far. He doesn't know what to do. It's really very simple. And so she's got feminine hope. The hope is about to be dashed. And she cannot withstand his argument that they should part. She cannot, because she believes she's at fault. She figures if they went far enough, nobody would know about her misfortune. On the third day of the estrangement, Claire's love was ethereal and imaginative, but is it real? Again, he's in love with an image. He's not in love with the person behind the image, the essence of the person. She wants to leave him and go home. She more or less makes the decision about what they're going to do, and he says, "Then it shall be so." "I feared it would come to this," she says. "You yourself might be tempted to say words. They might be overheard, perhaps by my own children. Later on in the relationship, he might get angry with her about this. Insulting things might be said. We can't stay together." She was appalled by the determination revealed in the depth of this gentle being she had married. He really wants to do this. He really wants to separate from her. And he says, I think of people more kindly when I am away from them. Perhaps we shall shake down together someday. It's the old thing about absence makes the heart grow fonder, but it's a nonsense statement. There's a fascination between them. And Hardy ends this reading assignment by saying, moreover, when two people are once parted, have abandoned a common domicile and a common environment, new growths insensibly bud upward to fill each vacated place, unforeseen accidents hinder intentions, and old plans are forgotten. Their plan is to separate, or his plan is to separate for a while, then come back together. Well, what's going to happen while they're separated? Things are going to happen. Maybe they won't come back together. Maybe one of them will not want to come back together. But in his stupidity, he assumes that this is the way to go. And now you know why I don't like him at all. He's the creep who leads you down the garden path and betrays you when it's too late.